Over the centuries, the Vatican has become a symbol of Christian spirituality, but also an epicenter of scandals that challenge its own morality. Behind closed doors, stories of corruption, abuses, and even controversial rituals intertwine with the political and religious power of one of the most influential institutions in the world. How can a sacred space carry within its history accounts of orgies, secret pacts, and influences that, for many, flirt with occultism and the shadows? Were these practices merely the fruit of human decadence, or is there something darker involving invisible forces that shaped the destiny of the Church? The history of the papacy is filled with episodes that call into question the values the Catholic Church claims to represent. From the earliest centuries, the demands of celibacy and purity were contradicted by behaviors that reflected human desires more than divine ideals. Among these scandals, lust has always been at the center of some of the most controversial stories involving popes. John XII, elected pope at 18 years old, is perhaps one of the most emblematic examples of this decadence. His behavior was so scandalous that historical documents describe the Vatican as a house of pleasures. The young pope promoted orgies in his quarters and even consecrated bishops during parties marked by excesses. What leads a man, destined to represent faith, to so explicitly surrender to hedonism? For many, the answer may lie in the influence of negative spiritual forces. In esoteric tradition, practices of extreme indulgence, especially involving carnal desire, are associated with entities like Asmodeus, known as the demon of lust. Was John XII merely a young man lost in his instincts, or was he, consciously or unconsciously, feeding obscure forces? Moving on to the Renaissance, we find Alexander VI of the notorious Borgia family. This pope not only embraced corruption but also organized banquets known as candelabra feasts. These celebrations involved obscene competitions, where naked dancers and members of the high ecclesiastical hierarchy participated in condemnable activities. Did Alexander VI view this as mere amusement, or was there something ritualistic in his gatherings that sought to manipulate occult energies? The repetition of these behaviors over the centuries cannot be seen as mere coincidence. In various spiritual traditions, uncontrolled desire is considered a gateway for negative forces. These acts, which should have been only human scandals, may have reverberated on a deeper spiritual level. The pornocracy of the 10th century, under the command of Sergius III and his powerful female successors, marked another dark period. The Vatican became a stage of conspiracies and intrigues, where sex and power were indiscriminately mixed. Could this environment have generated an energy that would continue to influence future leadership? These practices of lust often reflect a pattern of indulgence that contradicts the Christian message of restraint and redemption. How can an institution that preaches the sanctity of the body justify a history filled with physical and moral indulgence? It is not only individual actions that raise suspicions. Some scholars believe that the orgies and parties might have contained ritualistic elements, perhaps unconscious, that evoke pagan traditions. The symbolism of ancient rituals, where lust was used to channel power or worship deities, resonates in descriptions of some of these papal festivities. Even in more recent centuries, sexual scandals continued to shake the Church. Reports of abuse by clergy members, although distinct from papal orgies, reflect a continuity in the disrespect for the spiritual and moral principles the Church claims to uphold. What makes these acts even more disturbing is the silence surrounding them. The culture of covering up errors, rather than confronting them, creates an atmosphere of connivance that many associate with dark pacts. After all, why would preserving an institutional image be more important than protecting the values it preaches? The case of John XXIII, though less explicit, adds another dimension to the discussion. He was known for his connections with controversial figures and a circle of powerful individuals. Reports suggest that his political alliances were accompanied by parties that, according to rumors, involved questionable practices. There is a thin line between human decadence and the invocation of external forces. Many wonder if these popes simply acted on instinct or if there was an invisible influence directing these actions. The repetition of these behaviors over the centuries suggests that lust in the Vatican may be more than just a personal weakness. In occult traditions, extreme acts of indulgence are often seen as ways to manipulate energies. Could the orgies and excesses in the Vatican, intentional or not, have contributed to attracting negative forces that shaped the Church's history? Despite everything, the Church managed to rebuild itself repeatedly. Is this a sign of its resilience, or just an endless cycle of collapse and reconstruction? What prevents a true reform that definitively breaks with these historical patterns? The Vatican, with its aura of sanctity, continues to bear the marks of these stories of decadence. And as long as these marks remain hidden or denied, can the Church truly claim that it is guided solely by divine light? The Vatican is revered as the spiritual heart of the Catholic Church, but it is also the setting of supernatural phenomena that defy reason. Reports of possessions, apparitions, and paranormal events suggest that the place carries an energy that goes beyond the divine. This duality leads many to view the Vatican as a meeting point between opposing spiritual forces. Among the most disturbing cases are reports of possessions within the Apostolic Palace itself. In a confidential meeting in the 1980s, a young priest supposedly entered a trance and began to speak in ancient tongues, mentioning names of demons that appear in apocryphal texts. Witnesses claimed the priest seemed to be responding to an invisible entity, and the incident ended with an emergency exorcism. The exorcism room in the Vatican is another place with a sinister reputation. Clerics who work there report frightening episodes, such as sudden temperature changes, voices that emerge without explanation, and a constant sense of being watched. A renowned exorcist described facing an entity that identified itself as Leviathan, associated with chaos and the maintenance of secrets. In addition to exorcisms, the Vatican is also the stage of apparitions that defy explanation. One of the most well-known accounts took place in the 1920s, when Swiss guards claimed to have seen a shadowy figure walking through the inner courtyard and disappearing before their eyes. Many believe this figure is linked to the Vatican's underground tunnels, which supposedly harbor occult activities. In the Vatican's secret archives, there are records of paranormal phenomena documented by clerics over the centuries. One of these documents describes a crucifix that moved on its own during a private mass, while others mention inexplicable lights appearing in closed rooms. These events often coincide with moments of crisis or important decisions, suggesting a connection with the accumulated spiritual energies of the place. Sacred relics also play a central role in these phenomena. The Cross of Constantine, kept in a restricted chapel, is considered a powerful artifact. Clerics who have had access to it reported sensations of euphoria or dread, depending on their spiritual state. Some believe that the cross amplifies spiritual energies, both positive and negative. Another object shrouded in mystery is the Chalice of Antioch, which many believe to be the true Holy Grail. Reports suggest that those who attempted to handle the chalice improperly suffered inexplicable accidents, such as falls or sudden illnesses. These events reinforce the idea that some relics carry an energetic charge that cannot be underestimated. In occult traditions, places with a high concentration of spiritual rituals are seen as portals to other dimensions. The Vatican, with its centuries of ceremonies and devotions, may have become one of these portals, attracting both divine light and dark forces. Are these supernatural manifestations merely coincidences, or do they reflect a constant spiritual battle? Beyond the objects, the apocryphal texts kept in the Vatican's archives are also considered sources of mysteries. There are rumors that some of these texts contain formulas for invoking or banishing spiritual entities. Although the Church denies using these documents, there are accounts that, in the past, popes and exorcists consulted them during times of crisis. A notable example is the Codex Umbra, a medieval manuscript supposedly found in one of the Vatican's libraries. The text describes spiritual protection rituals that require a balance between light and darkness. Scholars believe that the improper use of these rituals could open doors to unwanted manifestations. Supernatural phenomena are not limited to internal spaces. In St. Peter's Square, tourists and pilgrims occasionally report sightings of strange lights or shadows that seem to move independently. These accounts, though dismissed as illusions, are frequent enough to arouse suspicion. The use of incense and chants in church rituals is also interpreted as an attempt to purify the environment. However, there are reports that, on some occasions, these elements were not enough to dissipate the feeling of spiritual oppression. Is something more powerful acting in the shadows of the Vatican? Popes such as John Paul II and Benedict XVI, both active defenders of exorcism, often mentioned the struggle against invisible forces as one of the Church's greatest responsibilities. During his pontificate, Benedict XVI is said to have personally conducted an exorcism in a private audience, an event rarely discussed publicly. Pope Francis has also acknowledged the increase in negative spiritual activities in recent times. In interviews, He emphasized the need to train more exorcists and strengthen the Church's spiritual defenses. His stance suggests that the supernatural manifestations in the Vatican are taken seriously by the current leadership. At the heart of these stories lies a disquieting question: what really happens within the walls of the Vatican? Are the supernatural phenomena merely reflections of the intense faith that permeates the place, or do they indicate a greater spiritual battle, where light and darkness contend for control of one of the world's most sacred locations? The Vatican has always been more than a spiritual center. It is a nucleus of political and cultural power that has shaped the destiny of civilizations. However, throughout its history, accounts have emerged of pacts and alliances that transcend the earthly plane. According to many theories, these agreements flirt with occult forces and reveal a pursuit of power that may have profound spiritual implications. One of the most emblematic milestones of this alliance with secular power was the Lateran Treaty of 1929, which established the Vatican as a sovereign state. Many celebrated the treaty as a victory for the Church, but occult theorists believe it represented more than that: a pact that consolidated the Vatican's political influence and allowed it to operate secretly in a world of conflicting interests. In esoteric circles, the Vatican's sovereignty is seen as a shield that protects not only its wealth but also secrets dating back to its foundation. Some suggest that apocryphal texts, kept in the Vatican's secret archives, contain rituals or formulas that could influence global events. Does the Vatican guard these texts out of prudence, or as a tool for spiritual and political manipulation? The relationship between the Church and secret societies is a constant theme in conspiracy theories. The Order of the Knights of Malta, for example, is often cited as a group operating under the Vatican's protection, but with its own agendas. This connection raises questions. To what extent is the Vatican involved in pacts that could be interpreted as dark alliances? On the spiritual plane, the quest for absolute control is often associated with Lucifer, who represents pride and rebellion. Many see in the Church's rigid hierarchy a manifestation of this demonic archetype, especially in its insistence on dominating both the secular and spiritual worlds. During the Renaissance, popes like Leo X and Julius II were known not only for their patronage of the arts but also for their connection with alchemists and astrologers. Although the Church condemned esoteric practices, these popes apparently used them in their private circles. Were these interests merely a fashion of the time, or an attempt to channel occult energies to strengthen their authority? Papal conclaves, where the successor to St. Peter is chosen, are events shrouded in mystery and symbolism. The white smoke that announces the choice of a new pope is seen as a spiritual sign, but it can also be interpreted as a consecration ritual. Some theorists claim that these gatherings include occult practices intended to ensure the continuity of the Vatican's power. Another fascinating aspect is the connection between the Vatican and ancient Egypt, symbolized by the obelisk in St. Peter's Square. In Hermetic traditions, the obelisk is seen as a channel of energy between heaven and earth. Does its presence reflect a hidden intention to manipulate these energies in favor of the Church? During the 20th century, the Vatican navigated dark waters amidst totalitarian regimes. Its neutrality during World War II raised suspicions that the Church was making pacts to preserve its position. Some point out that the Vatican's silence about the Holocaust may have been a price paid to ensure its survival. The Cold War also brought the Vatican's political role to the forefront. John Paul II, for example, was instrumental in the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. To many, he was the embodiment of light fighting the darkness of atheistic materialism. But were his efforts fully aligned with spiritual principles, or was there also a power agenda? In the 21st century, Pope Francis has been seen as a reformer, but his internal resistance suggests that there are forces in the Vatican that prefer to keep old pacts intact. Does this resistance merely reflect a struggle for tradition, or could it be connected to interests that go beyond what is visible? Vatican diplomacy, though presented as neutral, is often subject to criticism. Some argue that its efforts to mediate global conflicts hide covert interests, especially in strategic areas such as the Middle East and Latin America. Among demonic archetypes, Astaroth is associated with forbidden knowledge and manipulation. Does the preservation of occult texts in the Vatican reflect an attempt to control this kind of power? And if so, who is truly utilizing it? Many believe the Vatican is a center of spiritual energy, where opposing forces of light and darkness are in constant battle. This view reflects the duality of the Church, which at the same time preaches compassion and accumulates political power. In the end, the connection between the Vatican and pacts of power and occult influences is a reflection of its complexity. Is it merely a human institution trying to survive, or are there invisible forces shaping its destiny? The sexual scandals involving leaders of the Catholic Church represent one of the deepest stains in the Vatican's history. Although reports of lust and abuse date back centuries, modern cases have brought to light a dark truth. These practices were not merely isolated deviations, but part of a pattern that persists in cycles, feeding destructive spiritual energies. Since the end of the XX century, investigations have revealed systematic abuse cases in various parts of the world. Children and young people were victimized by priests and bishops who, instead of being held accountable, were protected by the hierarchy and transferred to other parishes. This attitude of cover-up not only destroyed lives, but also shook the trust in the institution as a whole. In occult traditions, the abuse of power over the innocent is considered one of the gravest acts, generating a dense energy that can attract negative forces. These energies are seen as nourishment for destructive entities, perpetuating cycles of pain and corruption. Could the scandals in the Vatican, intentional or not, have opened a portal to these influences? Reports from victims and leaked documents, such as the relics, revealed not only the extent of the abuses, but also the internal resistance to any attempt to expose those responsible. This culture of silence can be interpreted as an implicit pact to preserve power. In demonological traditions, Baal Peor is associated with acts that morally corrupt an entire society. Could this figure be a symbolic reflection of what occurs in the Church? More than the abuses themselves, what shocks is the pattern of repetition. From John XII in the X century, promoting orgies inside the Vatican, to contemporary popes accused of protecting abusers, the theme seems to echo throughout history. Do these actions represent only human weakness, or is there a negative spiritual force perpetuated within the institution? In modern times, Pope Benedict XVI faced a barrage of accusations against members of the clergy, especially in the United States and Ireland. Although he tried to implement measures to punish the guilty, many believe his actions were insufficient. What prevented him from acting more decisively? Fear of destabilizing the Church, or something deeper? During his pontificate, Benedict XVI also dealt with theories suggesting that some abuse networks within the Church had a ritualistic character. Although such allegations are difficult to prove, they raise unsettling questions. To what extent could these actions be linked to conscious or unconscious esoteric practices? Popes such as John Paul II, although revered, also faced criticism. He was accused of ignoring allegations against powerful figures like Martial Maciel, founder of the Legionaries of Christ. This inaction, seen by many as an attempt to preserve the unity of the Church, raised doubts about the papacy's commitment to justice. Beyond abuse cases, other sexual scandals have shaken the Church. Recent investigations have revealed the existence of prostitution networks involving clergy members, and even reports of private parties reminiscent of the excesses of the Renaissance. Can these practices be interpreted as mere hypocrisy, or is there a more complex spiritual component? Lilith, a figure associated with destructive sexuality in esoteric traditions, is often evoked as a symbol of rebellion and indulgence. Do the sexual scandals in the Vatican reflect a hidden archetype acting in the shadows, challenging the holiness expected of its leaders? In recent times, Pope Francis has taken on the difficult task of confronting scandals and promoting reforms. His more open stance and his criticisms of abuses represented a ray of hope for many. However, he also faced resistance from internal factions that seemed more interested in protecting traditions and privileges. A persistent question is how these scandals impact the Church and its faithful spiritually. In spiritual traditions, acts that violate purity and innocence are seen as generating an energetic stain that affects not only those involved, but also the surrounding community. Could this stain be the reason why the faith of so many Catholics has weakened over the years? Furthermore, the consequences of these acts are not limited to the physical plane. Many theologians and esoteric scholars believe that the perpetuation of these cycles creates a spiritual disconnection between the Church and its divine mission. In this context, the Church would be spiritually fragmented, trapped between opposing forces of light and darkness. The faithful, for their part, are left in a state of spiritual confusion. How can one trust an institution that covers up such terrible acts? This loss of trust is not just an institutional issue, but also a blow to people's relationship with their own spirituality. At the heart of everything remains the question: will the Church be able to break this cycle of abuses and scandals, or will it continue to be a stage for destructive forces that threaten its essence? Can the Vatican free itself from the shadows that surround it, or is it destined to carry this burden for its entire existence? Over the centuries, the Catholic Church has accumulated one of the world's greatest fortunes, a reality that directly contrasts with Christ's teachings on humility and material detachment. However, these riches did not come without controversy. Behind the Vatican's walls, obscure financial practices and veiled pacts contributed to the formation of an institution whose strength is not limited to the spiritual realm. One of the oldest criticisms of the Church concerns the sale of indulgences, popularized during the Renaissance. This system, which promised divine forgiveness in exchange for payments, turned the concept of salvation into a commodity. Beyond the ethical impact, some esoteric scholars believe this practice represented an unconscious pact with Mammon, the demon of greed, by prioritizing material wealth over spiritual purity. In addition to indulgences, the Vatican's property management also raises questions. On several occasions, allegations have emerged that church-owned properties were rented to morally questionable businesses, such as casinos, brothels, and pharmaceutical companies producing contraceptives, a direct contradiction of its own dogmas. Is this mere hypocrisy, or do these transactions carry a deeper spiritual symbolism? In occult traditions, it is believed that using material wealth for contradictory purposes can create a dense energy affecting not only the individuals involved, but also the community they represent. In the Vatican's case, does the way it manages its wealth spiritually compromise the institution? In the 1980s, the Banco Ambrosiano scandal shed light on the complexities of Vatican finances. More than just money laundering, investigations revealed ties to criminal organizations and influential figures. Although widely discussed, what few know is that part of the misappropriated funds was invested in companies manufacturing weapons. This choice seems more aligned with the pursuit of power than with the pacifist ideals of the Catholic faith. These financial practices also involve the ritualistic use of money, something explored in occult traditions. In various cultures, money is seen as a form of energy, and suspicious transactions can be interpreted as rituals reinforcing pacts of power. Could the Vatican be using its wealth to influence not only the physical plane but the spiritual as well? Another example that raises suspicions is the resistance Pope Francis faced in his attempts to reform the Vatican Bank. His audits and the dismissal of corrupt members were met with strong opposition, suggesting that obscure practices are deeply entrenched. This resistance can be interpreted as a reflection of the influence of forces that prefer to maintain the status quo. The Lateran Treaty, signed in 1929, established the Vatican as a sovereign state and guaranteed its financial autonomy. For many, this represented a political victory, but in esoteric circles, it is believed that the treaty also marked the beginning of a new era of hidden pacts, protected by the absolute secrecy of the Holy See. Moreover, the Vatican's secret archives remain a source of fascination. Some theorists suggest these archives contain not only historical documents but also formulas for spiritual manipulation and records of pacts that guarantee the Church's material power. What truly lies hidden in these archives? Another disturbing aspect is the Church's relationship with authoritarian regimes. During World War II, the Vatican's neutrality was criticized as a veiled pact to protect its interests. Later, during the Cold War, the Church played a central role in funding anti-communist movements, often aligned with controversial figures. In spiritual traditions, the idea of sacrifice in exchange for power is associated with Moloch, an entity symbolizing the trade of moral values for material benefits. Could the Vatican's political alliances throughout history reflect a similar archetype? A more recent example of questionable practices involves the Vatican's investments in adult entertainment companies. Documents revealed that funds intended for humanitarian causes were used to finance films of explicit content, something that goes against all Catholic principles. This revelation caused outrage, but also raises spiritual questions. How do these contradictions impact the divine essence of the Church? Another contentious point is the use of luxury properties to house elite figures, including politicians and businessmen accused of corruption. These alliances not only reinforce the Vatican's political power, but also create an aura of exclusivity that contradicts its mission of serving the poor. The wealth accumulated by the Church over the centuries has also been used to fund ventures that blend spirituality and material power. One example is the investment in archaeological research to find biblical artifacts, such as the Ark of the Covenant, which many believe possess unique spiritual properties. Do these searches reflect a genuine interest in history, or is there something more hidden at play? At the heart of all these practices remains a disquieting question. Is the Vatican's wealth a sign of divine blessing, or is it the result of hidden pacts that have compromised the Church's spiritual essence? This question transcends the material plane and forces us to confront the duality of the Vatican as both an institution of faith and of power. Beneath the Vatican's foundations, a labyrinth of tunnels and catacombs holds not only the mortal remains of saints and martyrs, but also secrets that defy common explanations. These underground spaces have long been the subject of theories suggesting that they house secret rituals and items of spiritual power. Are the catacombs merely historical sites, or do they play an active role in the Vatican's spiritual dynamics? In occult traditions, underground places are often seen as points of convergence between the earthly and the spiritual worlds. According to some theories, the catacombs beneath the Vatican, connected to a vast network of tunnels, were used for rituals aimed at evoking or controlling invisible forces. There are accounts from workers who claim to have found enigmatic inscriptions on the tunnel walls, indicating the performance of ancient ceremonies. Beyond the catacombs, it is believed that the Vatican's secret archives hold more than historical documents. Theorists speculate that apocryphal manuscripts, descriptions of rituals, and forbidden texts lie hidden there, protected from the public due to their potentially devastating nature. Could these texts reveal spiritual practices linking the Church to esoteric traditions that predate Christianity? Among the artifacts associated with the Vatican, rumors suggest that items like the Staff of Aaron and the Spear of Destiny are under its protection. These objects, described as channels of divine or destructive power, carry profound spiritual significance. But what truly motivates the Vatican to keep these items safeguarded? Are they merely historical relics or tools of spiritual manipulation? Another point of intrigue is the possibility that the Vatican holds fragments of texts considered heretical by traditional Christianity, but which contain hidden knowledge. Some suggest that these texts include formulas for accessing spiritual portals or manipulating energies, something the Church would prefer to keep far from public reach. The idea that the Vatican is a center of spiritual energy is reinforced by monuments like St. Peter's Basilica. Its dome, aligned with certain constellations, is seen by esoteric theorists as an attempt to channel cosmic forces. Is this architecture a celebration of the divine, or a tool of spiritual control? On the demonological plane, the presence of entities like Leviathan, a symbol of chaos and the maintenance of secrets, is often associated with places where shadows prevail. Could the secrets kept in the archives and catacombs reflect this archetype's influence, hiding truths that could shake the world's faith? During the Renaissance, popes like Julius II were known for surrounding themselves with figures linked to astrology and alchemy. Although they publicly condemned these practices, many accounts indicate that they were used to strengthen papal power. Did these rituals leave spiritual marks in the Vatican spaces, perpetuating cycles of light and darkness? Another intriguing theory is that the Vatican uses the wealth it has accumulated over the centuries to fund secret research in search of lost spiritual artifacts. Beyond the Holy Grail, it is believed that the Church is engaged in archaeological quests aiming to find items with powers beyond human comprehension. The existence of underground tunnels extending beyond the Vatican is also subject to speculation. Some theorists suggest that they connect the Holy City to strategic locations in Europe, allowing discreet transport of valuable items or even secret meetings. Information control is another practice attributed to the Vatican. Its diplomacy, often praised for its neutrality, is seen by some as an instrument of control. The use of ceremonial seals and the exchange of letters is considered by esoteric scholars as a reflection of ancient pacts between the Church and invisible forces. The presence of occult symbols in papal rituals also raises questions. The triple tiara worn by popes until the 20th century, for example, is interpreted as an emblem of domination over heaven, earth, and the underworld. This symbolism can be read as both an assertion of power and an attempt to balance opposing spiritual energies. In recent times, Pope Francis has attempted to bring more transparency to Vatican practices, but he has faced resistance. This opposition may be interpreted as a reflection of interests that wish to preserve secrets which, if revealed, could change the perception of the Church. Places of great spiritual energy, like the Vatican, are often seen as battle zones between light and darkness. Many believe that the practices carried out in its catacombs and sacred spaces are attempts to control this duality, ensuring that the scale never fully tips in either direction. The true nature of the Vatican as a center of occult influence remains a mystery. Its practices and secrets, carefully guarded, continue to fuel theories about its connection to invisible forces. Will all these secrets ever be revealed, or will they remain hidden beneath layers of symbolism and mystery? The history of the Vatican is much more than a narrative of faith and spirituality. It is an intricate labyrinth of power, scandals, and secrets that transcend the material plane. From orgies held by popes to political pacts and veiled alliances, each chapter of its trajectory seems to reveal an institution caught between divine light and the shadows it has itself generated. The sexual scandals, abuses of power, and obscure financial practices not only challenge the Church's morality but also raise spiritual questions. Is the Vatican merely a human organization subject to the failings of human nature, or do these practices indicate the presence of invisible influences that have shaped its destiny? If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected some videos filled with profound knowledge and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step to transforming your reality.